All my life I have known that people leave sooner or later. My parents, my husband Humphrey, and even my dear sister Tiffany have all gone, leaving behind a void and memories that grow dimmer with each passing year. I am 73, and loneliness has long been my usual companion. I've always had a roof over my head, though. I still live in the house where I grew up, on a quiet street in Peoria. This two-story Victorian mansion, with its wide veranda and carved railings, once belonged to my parents. They bought it before I was born, during the years when Peoria was booming with river commerce and numerous industries. When my parents grew old, they decided to deed the house to Tiffany, my older sister. She had always been their pride, educated, successful, and with bright prospects. Shortly afterward, however, Tiffany married Harold Bridges, an ambitious lawyer, and moved with him to Chicago. Her parents were a little disappointed, but understood her choice. The big city offered more opportunities. I stayed in the house, by then working as a teacher at a local school. When my parents passed away first, my father and then my mother 2 years later, I continued to live here, keeping the family nest in order like a keeper of the fire. At 29, I married Humphrey Prescott, the owner of a small bookstore. We were happy in spite of our modest means. A year later, our only son, Asher, was born. Tiffany was by then the mother of an adorable little girl, Abigail, who was 3 years older than my son. My sister regularly brought her niece to visit for the summer, and the children became fast friends despite the age difference. Our quiet life continued until Humphrey was diagnosed with lung cancer. He passed away quickly before he could see Asher graduate from high school. I had to return to teaching full-time to provide for my son and pay for his college education. 15 years ago came the terrible news. Tiffany passed away suddenly from a brain aneurysm. She was only 62. At the funeral, Abigail, by then a married woman with children of her own, hugged me and said, "Aunt Moira, Mom always said you were the soul of this house. Technically it's mine now, but I want you to continue to live in it as long as you wish. I am long settled in Minneapolis and have no plans to return to Peoria." I was touched by her words. Abigail grew up to be a kind and caring woman, much like her mother. She'd visited me several times a year since then, brought her children with her on vacations, and we'd maintained a warm, almost maternal relationship, even though I was only her aunt. It took Escher a long time to find himself after college. He tried several professions from law to landscaping, but nothing held his interest for long. He eventually settled on photography. His shots of old Peoria architecture were even exhibited at a local gallery. It didn't bring in a lot of money, but it allowed him to feel a sense of fulfillment. When Asher turned 38, he announced to me that he was getting married. This news both pleased and surprised me. My son had never been very consistent in relationships, and I was beginning to fear that I would never see my grandchildren. "Mom, her name is Fiona," he said at one of our weekly Thursday night dinners. "We met at a photo exhibit in Chicago 3 months ago. She works at an advertising agency. You're going to love her." I pretended to be excited, of course. I didn't really care who Asher married as long as she made him happy. At least, that's what I'd thought until I met Fiona Quinlan for the first time. We had lunch at an Italian restaurant in downtown Peoria. Fiona was 32, had bright red hair and cold green eyes whose gaze seemed to evaluate everything around her in terms of market value. She talked a lot about her career in advertising, her plans for the future, and how she would like to live in her own home rather than in a rented apartment. "It's so important to have your own real estate these days," she said, sipping wine from her glass. "It's the only thing that really stays with you." She cast a quick glance at Asher, then at me. "And your house, Mrs. Prescott? Is it big?" "It's not really my house," I answered, feeling a sudden need to clarify the situation. "Legally, it belongs to my niece Abigail. I've just been living there since my sister died." Fiona nodded, but there was something in her eyes that reminded me of a hunting dog on the prowl. "Very comfortable," she said with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "It must be nice to live alone in such a big house." That evening, when Asher brought me home, I asked him bluntly, "Does she know you won't inherit this house?" "Of course, Mom," he replied, a little irritated. "I've told her everything. Fiona's just curious. She grew up in a small apartment, and for her a house with a veranda and a garden is almost like a palace. I didn't pursue the subject further, but my inner restlessness wouldn't let me go. I'd learned to be a good judge of character over the years, and something about Fiona Quinlan had alarmed me from the first moment I'd met her. The wedding was 4 months later, a modest ceremony in a local church and a small reception at a restaurant. Abigail and her family traveled from Minneapolis, and we had a long talk the day after the ceremony. "What did you think of Fiona?" I asked as we sat on the veranda, enjoying the warm September morning. Abigail shrugged. "It's hard to say after one day of knowing her. She seems determined. Asher seems happy, and that's what counts, isn't it?" "Of course," I agreed, but my doubts lingered. After the wedding, Asher and Fiona rented a house in the suburbs of Peoria, and our weekly dinners became less frequent and then stopped. Asher attributed it to busyness, new projects, business trips. I didn't insist, realizing that he had his own life now. About 6 months after the wedding, however, Fiona suddenly began to show up at my place. At first, she came as if by chance, bringing a cake or fresh bread, inquiring about my health, offering to help around the house. Then her visits became more regular. She often looked around with undisguised interest, asking questions about the furniture, about the history of the house, about when it was built. "Late 19th century, I answered. This was an upscale neighborhood when Peoria was the center of whiskey production. Mostly rich industrialists lived here. "How much would a house like that be worth now?" she asked me one day, as if by accident. "I have no idea," I answered dryly. Abigail had never mentioned selling it. "Of course," Fiona agreed quickly. "I'm just curious. You know, in the advertising business, it's important to be able to evaluate properties for shoots and presentations." That afternoon, I noticed her lingering in the office where the family papers were kept. When I went in there with tea, Fiona hurriedly stepped away from the secretary as if she had been caught red-handed. "I just admire antique furniture," she explained, but her eyes avoided my gaze. After that incident, I started locking the office when Fiona came in. It wasn't that I didn't trust her. I just preferred to be reassured. After all, the deeds to the house and other papers were an important part of Abigail's inheritance, and I felt a responsibility to keep them safe. Our relationship with Fiona continued to be politely strained. I was trying for Asher's sake. She was probably trying for her own reasons. I was beginning to realize that my sister-in-law's interest in the house wasn't mere curiosity, but I couldn't yet figure out what she was up to. One day, when Asher dropped in unannounced, I decided to talk to him about Fiona. "She comes here a lot," I said, trying to sound neutral. "She takes a great interest in the house." "Fiona just cares about you, Mom," Asher replied. "She knows how lonely you've been since Aunt Tiffany died. Plus, she likes the architecture of old houses." "She asks a lot of questions about the deeds to the house," I continued. "Are you sure you explained to her that the house belongs to Abigail, not me or you?" Asher's face tensed slightly. "Mom, please don't start. Fiona understands perfectly well. She's just curious." "What's wrong with that?" "Nothing." I backed off. "I just wanted to make sure everyone understood the situation." Escher left soon after, and the next day I got a text from Abigail. She was planning to come back in a month to take care of some business with the local IRS. I rejoiced. Her niece's visits were always a refreshing change of pace from my humdrum existence. By then, I was beginning to realize that my relationship with my sister-in-law was unlikely to ever be warm. We were too different, with different values and ideas about life. Fiona was the type of person who judged others by their appearance and financial status. I, on the other hand, had always believed that what mattered most was a person's inner being and actions. Peoria is especially beautiful in the spring. The Illinois River, flowing through the city, is filled with meltwater, and the parks along its banks bloom with thousands of flowers. On days like this, I love to walk around the historic downtown area, enjoying the architecture of the old buildings, each with its own history. On one such walk, I met an old friend, Lillian Harrow, whom I hadn't seen for almost a year. "Moira, darling," she exclaimed, hugging me tightly. "How are you? How are your son and his new wife?" We went into a small cafe, and over a cup of tea, I told her about my worries about Fiona. "You know," Lillian said thoughtfully, "my niece works in the same advertising agency as your sister-in-law. According to her, Fiona is an extremely ambitious woman who will stop at nothing to get what she wants. That's not news, I sighed. But what can she get out of our old house? It needs constant repairs. It's expensive to maintain. Honey, Lillian looked at me with surprise. You must not have been interested in the real estate market for a long time. Your neighborhood has become one of the most prestigious in Peoria in recent years. Old houses with history are worth their weight in gold now. That information got me thinking. Perhaps Fiona's interest in the house was purely practical. She saw it not just as a place to live, but as a good investment. It wasn't much consolation, but it at least explained her persistence. When I got home, I noticed an envelope on the porch. Someone had dropped it in the mailbox while I was gone. Inside were pictures of our house from different angles and a business card from a real estate office. No note, no explanation, just pictures and a business card. I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't just an unpleasant accident. Someone had purposely photographed the house, estimating its potential value, and I had little doubt who that someone was. That same evening, I called Asher and asked him to come over, without Fiona. He seemed surprised by such a request, but agreed and showed up at my place the next day. "What's wrong, Mom? Are you feeling all right?" he asked anxiously. I silently handed him an envelope with photos and a business card. He looked at them for a long time, then looked up at me. "So? Probably some realtor looking for clients in your neighborhood. It's common practice." "Escher," I said firmly, "this is not some random realtor. The photos are taken from angles that can only be seen from our garden. Someone came onto the property while I was away from home." He sighed. "Don't you think you're getting a little paranoid? Fiona says you often suspect her of some sort of shenanigans." "She said that?" I felt the blood rush to my face. "And why would I suspect her?" Asher shook his head. "Mom, listen to me. Fiona is just trying to be friendly. She's never talked about the house in the context of an inheritance or anything like that. You're overreacting to normal female curiosity." I realized it was useless to argue. Escher was in love and didn't want to see the obvious. I decided to change tactics. "Okay, maybe you're right," I said conciliatorily. Just tell Fiona that Abigail's coming over soon, and she'd like to meet you both. Why don't we all have dinner together?" Asher visibly relaxed. "Sure, Mom, I'll tell her. I'm sure Fiona would love to meet Abigail." When he left, I sat in the rocking chair on the veranda for a long time, watching the sun set over the horizon. The house I'd spent most of my life in suddenly seemed foreign and vulnerable. I sensed trouble was coming, but I didn't know how to prevent it. Abigail arrived 3 weeks later, alone, without her husband or children. She looked tired, but she was glad to see me. "Aunt Moira," she said as she hugged me, "you haven't changed at all. You're still as beautiful and statuesque as ever." We spent the afternoon talking about the family news, the problems with the roof, which was leaking again, and plans for the future. I told her about Fiona's strange behavior and showed her pictures of the house. "Do you think it's her?" Abigail asked, scrutinizing the pictures. "Who else would it be?" She'd taken an unhealthy interest in the house since they'd been married, and recently I'd noticed her rummaging through the family papers. Abigail frowned. "You know, Aunt Moira, maybe we should update the deeds to the house. Legally, I've owned it for 15 years, but we haven't done any additional paperwork since Mom died. Maybe we should do that to avoid any misunderstandings in the future." I agreed, though I knew in my heart that no amount of paperwork would stop Fiona if she was really up to something. In the evening, Asher and Fiona joined us for dinner. My sister-in-law was charming, smiling, joking, asking Abigail about her work in Minneapolis. But I noticed how intently she listened when the conversation turned to the house, and how her eyes sparkled when Abigail mentioned a possible real estate appraisal. After dinner, while Asher helped me in the kitchen and Abigail went out to call her husband, Fiona was alone in the living room. When I returned, I found her studying an old photo album, the same one that held pictures of our parents and the first deeds to the house. "What charming pictures," she said, not embarrassed. "Asher looks so much like his grandfather. And this must be your parents getting the keys to the house?" I nodded, taking the album from her hands. "Yes, it was a big event in their lives, the first house of their own." Fiona smiled. "They must have wanted it to stay in the family forever. It's a shame it went to your niece instead of you. There was a hint of innuendo in her words, and I decided to set the record straight. My parents wanted Tiffany to have the house, and she wanted her daughter to have it. This is exactly the way it's supposed to be, Fiona, and I'm perfectly happy with it. Her smile trembled a little, but quickly returned to its place. Of course, Mrs. Prescott. I was just thinking that maybe you'd like the house to go to Asher someday. After all, he is your only son. Asher needs to make his own history, not cling to mine, I said firmly. Now, if you don't mind, let's join the others. As they left, Fiona bid Abigail a particularly warm farewell, inviting her to visit her and Asher in the coming days. My niece agreed, though I could see that she wasn't too enamored of my sister-in-law. She's hiding something, Abigail said when we were alone. I can't be sure what it is, but her interest in the house strikes me as unhealthy. I feel the same way, I admitted. But Asher doesn't notice. He's completely under her influence. Abigail squeezed my hand. Don't worry, Aunt Moira. Tomorrow I'll see a lawyer and make sure the deeds to the house are in order. No one will be able to challenge your right to live here or my right to own the property. After Abigail's visit, the tension between Fiona and me became almost palpable. My sister-in-law stopped pretending to be friendly and started acting more openly. Now she came not with cakes and smiles, but with plans for the future and persistent questions. On one such visit, when she stopped by ostensibly to show me pictures from their trip to Chicago, the conversation inevitably turned to the subject of the house. You know, Moira, Fiona said, looking at the ceiling molding in the living room, Asher and I are thinking of buying our own house. Something like this with history, character. A laudable aspiration, I replied neutrally, pouring my tea. Peoria has a lot of beautiful historic buildings, especially in the Grandview Drive neighborhood. Yeah, but they cost a fortune, she sighed. And this house? It's such a shame it's just standing there, occupied by just one person. I put the kettle on slowly. Fiona, this house isn't just standing there. I live in it, and it still belongs to Abigail. But you're here alone, she continued, as if she hadn't heard me. So many rooms are empty. And Asher and I dream of having children, of having a big family. Wouldn't it be wise for the house to pass to us after after I'm dead? I asked you directly. Fiona, I think we've had this discussion before. It's not mine to leave or pass on. It belongs to Abigail. Fiona frowned slightly, as if it were a technicality. Yes, of course, legally. But you've been living here for how long? 15 years? 20? Doesn't that give you some rights? No, I answered firmly. I live here with Abigail's permission, that's all, and I'm perfectly happy with that. But that's not fair. Fiona suddenly shook off her pretense of politeness. You've raised your son here, cared for this house all your life, and some niece who doesn't even live in Peoria has more rights to him than you or Escher? I could feel my blood pressure starting to rise. Her words hurt me, but I tried to stay calm. Fiona, Abigail is not some niece. She's my sister's daughter to whom my parents gave the house. It's perfectly fair and legal. Legal, maybe, she snorted, but not fair. You have to think about Asher's future, about your possible grandchildren. Do you really want a family heirloom to fall into the wrong hands? Abigail is not a stranger, I repeated tiredly. But she's not your daughter, Fiona countered. Asher is your son, your flesh and blood. Don't you feel you have to protect his interests? I took a deep breath, trying not to be provocative. Asher's interests aren't hurt by the fact that his cousin owns the house. He has his own life, his own career, and his wife, I looked her straight in the eye, who I think is a little too focused on material things. Fiona stood up abruptly. I can see there's no use talking to you. You're stubborn and have no regard for the good of your family. Escher was right. You always preferred your sister and her child to your own son. I stood up too, feeling my hands shaking with anger. Asher would never say such a thing. How do you know what he says in private to his wife? Fiona grinned. You see him once a month if you're lucky. I'm with him every day. With that, she walked out, slamming the door loudly. I sank into the chair, trying to collect my thoughts. Did Asher really think I preferred Tiffany and Abigail to him? The thought hurt almost physically. I'd always tried to be a good mother, supporting his every endeavor, even the most reckless ones. How could he think I hadn't put his interests first? But what if Fiona was lying? What if she was just trying to sow discord between us so she could manipulate Asher more easily? That thought seemed more plausible, but it still left a bitter residue. I decided to call my son to clarify the situation, but he didn't answer. Instead, an hour later, a message came back. Sorry, Mom. Busy on a photo shoot. Talk to you later. The next few days passed in anxious anticipation. Asher never called back, and I hesitated to call again for fear of seeming intrusive, or worse, giving Fiona a reason to accuse me of trying to control my son. Finally, almost a week later, Escher showed up on my doorstep. He looked tired, shadows under his eyes. Hi, Mom, he said, hugging me. I'm sorry I haven't called in a while. I had a lot of work to do. I invited him into the living room and offered him tea, but he declined. I won't be long. I just wanted to make sure you were okay. I'm fine, I replied, watching his reaction carefully. What happened with you and Fiona? She seemed upset when she left the other day. Asher sighed and ran a hand through his hair, a gesture he'd learned from his father and did whenever he was nervous. Mom, Fiona told me about your conversation. She thinks that you disapprove of our marriage. What? I was genuinely surprised. Escher, I never said that. But you've made it clear that you think she's mercenary, he continued. That she's only interested in money and possessions. I chose my words carefully. All I said was that she might be too focused on material possessions. And that was after she'd called Abigail some niece and said I should be thinking of your interests, not hers. But you know what she meant, don't you? Asher looked almost pleading. She just wants our family to be well off so that our future children will have a good inheritance. What about Abigail's children? I asked quietly. They're part of our family too. Asher waved me away. Mom, they live in Minneapolis. They have their own lives. We see them once a year if we're lucky. And we're here in Peoria. This house is part of our history, my history. I grew up here, remember? Of course I remember, I said. But that doesn't change the fact that the house belongs to Abigail, and that's what your Aunt Tiffany decided, and your grandparents before her. But they couldn't have foreseen that Abigail would leave and never come back to Peoria, Escher exclaimed. If they'd known you'd live here alone for so many years, they would have signed the house over to you for sure. I shook my head. We'll never know what they would have done. The fact is, Abigail owns the house, and I live here with her permission, and I'm perfectly fine with that. But it's not fair, Asher repeated stubbornly, quoting Fiona almost verbatim. You've taken care of this house for so many years, and now that Fiona and I want to start a family, you refuse to even consider giving it to us. Escher, I was beginning to lose my patience. I can't give you something that doesn't belong to me. How many times do I have to say it? You could talk to Abigail, he suggested. Explain the situation. Maybe she'd be willing to sell the house to us at a reduced price or, I said. Stop, I raised my hand. I'm not going to ask Abigail to sell you the house. If you and Fiona want to buy it, go to her yourself, like adults. But don't drag me into these schemes. Asher's face turned rigid. You see? You don't even want to help. Fiona's right. You've always put Tiffany and Abigail before me. His words hit me like a slap in the face. I couldn't believe my own son was saying those things. It's not true, and you know it, I said quietly. I've always loved you more than anything in the world, Asher. But that doesn't mean I have to support your unreasonable demands or your wife's manipulations. Don't you dare accuse Fiona, he was almost shouting now. She just wants what's best for our family. For your family or for yourself? I asked. Are you sure you know the difference? Escher grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. I can see this conversation isn't going to work. You're too stubborn to understand our point of view. Escher, wait. I followed him. Let's talk calmly. I'm sure we can find a solution that will satisfy everyone. What solution, Mom? He turned around in the doorway. You've made it very clear you're not going to help us get this house. All you had to do was talk to Abigail. Ask her to consider our offer. But no, you'd rather protect her interests than mine. He walked out, leaving me standing in the doorway, feeling like the ground was shifting out from under my feet. Asher and I had never fought so hard before, all over a house that didn't even belong to me. The next few weeks passed in agonizing silence. Escher didn't call, didn't stop by. I tried calling him several times, but he either didn't pick up or the conversation was short and strained. One morning, as I was eating breakfast on the porch enjoying the warm summer day, Asher's car pulled into the driveway. My heart beat faster. Had he decided to reconcile? But Fiona got out of the car alone. She looked unusually anxious, almost frightened. I tensed, not knowing what to expect. "Moira," she said, coming up onto the veranda. "I need to talk to you. It's important." I silently pointed to the chair opposite. Fiona sat down, fidgeting nervously with the strap of her bag. Asher and I are very sorry about our last fight," she began. "We said a lot of unnecessary things, and I want to apologize for that." I nodded, waiting for her to continue. Something told me that apologizing wasn't the main purpose of her visit. "We've been thinking a lot about the house situation," Fiona continued, confirming my suspicions. "And I realized that maybe I'd been too forward and tactless. This house means so much more to you than just real estate. It's your history, your memories." "Exactly," I agreed with restraint. "And I understand why you don't want to get involved in the question of its future." Fiona paused. "But what if the house really belonged to you? What would you do with it then?" I frowned, not sure what she was getting at. "But it doesn't belong to me, Fiona. We've already discussed this." Yes, legally," she nodded. "But I found something interesting when I was helping Asher sort through his father's old things. A letter from your sister Tiffany dated the year before she died." She pulled an envelope out of her bag and handed it to me. I recognized her handwriting and opened the letter anxiously. It was addressed to Humphrey, my late husband. "Dear Humphrey, I hope this letter finds you and Moira in good health. I have thought long about the future of our family home and have decided that it should remain in Moira's capable hands after my death. She has always looked after it better than any of us. Of course, technically the house will pass to Abigail, but I've spoken to her and she agrees that Moira should have the right to live there as long as she wants and use it as she sees fit. Love, Tiffany." I reread the letter several times, trying to figure out what it meant. Why had Tiffany written it to Humphrey and not me? And why hadn't she mentioned it during our last conversation before she died? "See?" Fiona said triumphantly. "Your sister wanted you to keep the house. In Moira's capable hands," were her own words. "And to dispose of it as she sees fit is practically a transfer of ownership." I folded the letter slowly and returned it to the envelope. "No, Fiona. It's just an expression of trust and concern. Tiffany writes directly that, technically, the house will pass to Abigail. And that's exactly what happened." "But she also writes that you should have the right to dispose of it," Fiona insisted. "Doesn't that give you the right to sign it over to Asher if you want to?" I shook my head. "No, it gives me the right to live here, that's all. Which, by the way, I'm doing with Abigail's full consent." "Moira, you don't understand." Fiona leaned toward me, her eyes glittering feverishly. "This letter could change everything. If you show it to a lawyer, you might be able to challenge Abigail's ownership." "And why would I do that?" I asked, feeling my irritation rising. "To take the house away from my niece and give it to you?" "Not to me, but to Asher!" Fiona exclaimed. "Your only son, your flesh and blood!" I stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. "Fiona, take this letter and leave. I will not contest Abigail's ownership, period. And if you really care about Asher and our family, you will stop these pointless attempts to sow discord between us." Fiona's face contorted with anger. "You'll regret this, Moira. You could have put things right, secured your son's future. But instead you chose some distant relative who doesn't even live here." "Abigail is not some distant relative," I repeated tiredly. "She's my sister's daughter, and I love her almost as if she were my own child, and I'm not going to steal from her for your greed." Fiona stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over a chair. "So you've made up your mind? Well, I'll tell Asher you refuse to help us. We'll see what he says." "Tell him I love him and always will," I said, "no matter what lies you feed him." Fiona sprinted off the porch and was out of the driveway a minute later, tires squealing. I remained seated, staring out at the empty street. The same question kept running through my mind. What was she up to? I didn't believe Fiona would give up so easily. Her last words sounded like a threat, and I was afraid that was just the beginning. That evening, Asher called. His voice sounded strangely detached. "Mom, Fiona told me about your conversation. I don't understand why you refuse to even consider challenging the title to the house when you have a letter from Aunt Tiffany. Because it wouldn't be right, Asher, I replied. Tiffany wanted the house to go to Abigail, and I respect her will. What about my will? He asked bitterly. What about what I want for my family? Doesn't that matter? Of course it does, I said softly. But not at the expense of deception and manipulation. If you and Fiona want this house, talk to Abigail directly. Maybe she'll agree to sell it to you. You know very well that we can't afford to buy a house like this at market price, Asher said. The only way we can get it is if you change Abigail's mind or challenge her ownership. And you really want me to do that? I asked with pain in my voice. For me to betray my niece's trust and my sister's memory? Asher was silent for several long seconds. I don't know what I want, Mom. I'm tired of these constant fights. Fiona talks about the house every day, about how unfair it is that you're not helping us. I don't know what to think anymore. Escher, I said quietly, Fiona is manipulating you. She's using you to get this house. Don't you see that? Don't talk about her like that. His voice immediately became harsher. She's my wife, and she wants what's best for our family. I'm sorry. I realized I'd gone too far. I didn't mean to hurt you or Fiona. I just want you to understand my position. I understand, he said tiredly. You chose Abigail's side over mine. Well, I accept that. But don't expect me to pretend like everything's okay. With those words, he hung up, and I was left sitting with the phone in my hand, feeling tears streaming down my cheeks. How had we gotten to this point? How could an ordinary house destroy the mother-son relationship that had always been so close and warm? I knew I should call Abigail and warn her about Fiona's strange behavior, about the letter she'd found. But it was getting late, so I decided to do it in the morning. Right now, I just needed to sleep and get my thoughts together. It was a cloudy morning, low clouds hanging over Peoria, heralding rain. I woke up with a heavy feeling that hadn't left me since the last time I'd talked to Asher. I tossed and turned in bed, realizing I wasn't going to sleep again, and got up and went down to the kitchen to make tea. The house seemed unusually quiet, as if it were waiting for something to happen. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the old pipes echoed in the empty rooms. I thought about how I was going to spend the day. Maybe I should call Abigail, tell her about the letter Fiona had found, warn her of any problems. Or was it better to wait, to let things settle down on their own? My thoughts were interrupted by the sharp ringing of the phone. I flinched and hurried to answer it, secretly hoping it was Asher making up. Hello? Aunt Moira? It's Abigail. I felt both relieved and anxious at the same time. Abigail, darling, it's so good to hear from you. I was just about to call you. Is something wrong? She was immediately alert. It's nothing urgent, I hastened to reassure her. It's just, I've been having some difficulties with Fiona. She found an old letter from Tiffany that said the house was in her sister's capable hands, and she thought it gave me the right to challenge your ownership. What nonsense! Abigail was indignant. Mom never intended to change the will. She wanted the house to go to me, and I let you live in it as long as you wanted. I know, sweetheart, I sighed, and I've always been grateful for that. But Fiona, she's fixated on this house for some reason. She and Asher want it, and she doesn't understand why I refuse to help them get it. Because you're a decent man, that's why, Abigail said firmly. Listen, I'm just calling to let you know I'm coming in tomorrow. I have a client meeting in Peoria, and I've decided to stick around for a couple days. I think we should clear the air once and for all. I felt a heavy weight lifted off my shoulders. That would be wonderful, dear. Maybe you could talk to Asher and Fiona in person. Explain to them, I said. Of course I will, Abigail assured me. And I'll bring all the deeds to the house so there's no doubt. I'm also meeting with our family lawyer this afternoon. He'll prepare all the necessary paperwork. After talking to Abigail, my mood improved a little. I ate breakfast and decided to do some cleaning to take my mind off my anxious thoughts. As time passed, a light rain began to fall outside my window, turning the street into a damp canvas of wet asphalt and blurred trees. Around noon, I heard the sound of a car pulling up. My heart sped up. Is Asher really coming? But when I looked out the window, I was surprised to see Fiona's car. It was parked unevenly, almost askew, as if she were in a hurry or anxious. From the trunk, she pulled out an object that I couldn't immediately see because of the rain. I went to open the door, but Fiona didn't even ring the bell. She just stood on the porch, drenched to the skin with a wild look in her eyes and disheveled hair. She was holding a big metal canister. Fiona? I looked around, searching for Asher, but he was nowhere to be seen. What's wrong? Are you alone? She stared at me, unblinking, like she was seeing me for the first time. You lied, she said in a husky voice. All this time you've been lying to me, to Asher, to everyone. I felt a chill run down my spine. What are you talking about? Come inside, you're soaking wet. Don't pretend. Fiona took a step back, as if she was afraid I'd force her inside. I found the rest of the letters, every single one of them. I frowned, not sure what she was talking about. What other letters? In Escher's office, in an old box of his father's papers, she said, her voice jerky like she was struggling with each word. There's a whole correspondence between Tiffany and your husband. She was going to sign the house over to you, not Abigail. You should have gotten it 15 years ago. I remembered the one note she'd shown me earlier. Obviously, Fiona had misinterpreted the contents of the letters. Fiona, you're wrong. Tiffany never intended to sign the house over to me. She simply expressed her wish that I could live here after she died, and Abigail agreed to it. You're lying! Fiona was almost screaming. The letters say in black and white, I want Moira to have the house. It must stay in her hands. Why did you hide that? Why did you let Abigail take what was rightfully yours? And by extension, Asher's. I tried to remain calm, though her tone made me cold inside. Fiona, I don't know what letters you found, but you misunderstood them. Tiffany may have been talking about me looking after the house, but legally it was always meant for Abigail. It was clearly stated in the will. The will could be contested, she insisted. If you'd shown those letters 15 years ago, the house would be yours now. And you kept quiet and let it be taken from your own son. No one took anything from Asher, I said, beginning to lose my patience. The house was never meant for him. Tiffany had wanted it to go to her daughter, and I respected her decision. Fiona made a strange sound like a growl. You're protecting them, not your son. Always have. And you know what? Since you won't fight for what is rightfully yours, I'll do it for you. With those words, she picked up the canister and started unscrewing the cap. It was only then that I realized it was gasoline. Fiona, I took a step toward her, holding out my hand. What are you doing? Stop! But she had already poured some of the contents of the canister onto the porch and porch railing. The pungent smell of gasoline hit her nose. If you don't want to admit the truth, if you'd rather the house go to strangers than your own son, then let no one else have it. I couldn't believe what was happening. It was like a bad dream. Impossible to wake up from. Fiona, stop it right now. Are you crazy? This house is full of family heirlooms, photos, things that can't be replaced. Do you care? She was already going around the house, spraying gasoline on the walls. If you're willing to give it to Abigail, then you don't care that much about it. I rushed into the house to the phone. I had to call the police, stop this madness. But Fiona was faster. She ran around the house, pouring gasoline on the walls, and came back to the porch where I stood in a daze. If you didn't want to give it back, take it, she shouted and pulled a lighter out of her pocket. Fiona, stop! I took a desperate step toward her. Listen to me. Those letters are null and void. Even if I wanted to contest Tiffany's will, it would be impossible. Too much time has passed, and everything has been done according to the law. You're just a coward, she said contemptuously, afraid of ruining your relationship with your precious niece. What about your relationship with your own son? Don't you think about them? Of course I do, I exclaimed. But Asher would never approve of what you're doing now. You're destroying his childhood, his memories. I'm creating a future for him, Fiona replied with a kind of grim determination. When the house is gone, you can finally sue Abigail. Demand compensation. Money that should rightfully belong to Asher. I realized there was no point in talking to her. She was in some crazy state where logic and common sense no longer worked. Fiona, I'm calling the police, I said firmly and turned to go inside. No, she shouted and flicked her lighter. It happened so fast, I barely had time to jump back. The flames instantly engulfed the porch, spread to the wooden railing of the porch, and began to climb the walls of the house. The heat was so intense that I felt my eyebrows and eyelashes burn. Fiona stood on the lawn, watching the burgeoning fire with a kind of eerie satisfaction. Her face, lit by the flames, looked almost demonic. "Now they'll all understand," she said. "Escher will realize that you betrayed him, and Abigail will realize that you can't take what belongs to others with impunity." I couldn't believe this was really happening. The house I'd grown up in, where I'd spent the best years of my life, was burning before my eyes, set on fire by the wife of my only son. "Fiona," I said, struggling to hold back tears, "you made a terrible mistake. You should have done it for nothing." She grinned. "It was you who made a mistake when you thought you could stand between me and the future I want for my family." "No," I shook my head. "You don't understand. The house didn't belong to me." "Are you still insisting on that lie?" She laughed. "Even now that it's over?" "It's not a lie," I replied firmly. "And I can prove it. I just got off the phone with Abigail. She's coming tomorrow with a lawyer and all the deeds to the house, including Tiffany's will, which says in black and white that the house goes to her." For the first time ever, I saw the confidence on Fiona's face waver. "You're bluffing." "No." I pulled my phone out of my pocket. "You can call her yourself and check it out. She'll be here tomorrow morning with the paperwork and the lawyer. Right now, I think we should both get away from the burning house. The fire department will be here soon." I did hear sirens in the distance. Apparently, one of the neighbors had already called the fire department. Fiona stood motionless, staring at the fire, which by now had engulfed a large part of the facade. Her face gradually changed from triumph to bewilderment, from bewilderment to horror. "But the letters," she muttered. "It said—" "You misinterpreted them," I said, feeling strangely calm, even though my life was literally burning before my eyes. Tiffany had really wanted me to be able to live in the house after she died, and Abigail had allowed it. But legally, the house always belonged to Abigail. And now you'll have to explain to her why you burned down her property." Fiona's face paled, turning almost dead white in the glow of the flames. "But Escher said he was sure." "Asher believed what you told him," I said bitterly. "You wanted this house so badly that you made him believe something that never existed." Fiona looked confused, as if she was only now beginning to realize the magnitude of her act. "Yeah, I didn't mean to. I thought—" "You didn't think?" I cut her off. "You wanted something that didn't belong to you, and you stopped at nothing. And now you have to face the consequences." The sirens got louder, and a minute later, fire trucks pulled into the street. A police car showed up behind them. Fiona stared at the approaching flashers with an expression of pure terror. "What am I going to do now?" she whispered. I didn't answer. I didn't care about her moral dilemma. I watched the roof of the house where I had spent most of my life collapse, the flames devouring the walls that held my most precious memories, the pictures of my parents, Humphrey's letters, Asher's childhood drawings, Tiffany's jewelry that she had left me before she died. It all turned to ash before my eyes. The police quickly cordoned off the area, moving the gawkers away from the burning building. One of the officers approached me. "Ma'am, are you the owner of the house?" "I live here," I replied. "But the house belongs to my niece, Abigail Bridges." "Do you know how the fire started?" I looked at Fiona, who stood with her head down and a look of utter defeat on her face. "I know," I said. "She set the house on fire. On purpose." The officer's eyes widened, and he shifted his gaze to Fiona. "Is that true, ma'am?" Fiona didn't answer, continuing to stare at the ground. "She must have a gas can in her car," I added, "and a lighter in her pocket." The officer nodded to his colleague, and he walked over to Fiona, starting the arrest procedure. I heard him read her driver's license as the handcuffs clicked on her wrists. She raised her head only once as she was being led to the police car, and our gazes met. There were so many different emotions in her eyes: anger, fear, bewilderment, and somewhere deep down, the realization of what she had done. "I'm sorry," she whispered, barely audible. "I didn't know. I didn't answer." There were no words that could express what I felt at that moment. The house that had remembered so many generations of my family was turning into ruins. all because of one man's greed and ambition. Firefighters fought the blaze, but it was too late. The old wooden building was burning like a matchbox. All I could do was stand there and watch my past disappear. Someone threw a blanket over my shoulders. I didn't even realize I was shivering. The police officer led me to his car and offered me a seat. "I need to call my son," I said, suddenly thinking of Asher. "He needs to know what happened." The officer nodded and gave me his cell phone. Mine was left in the burning house. Asher wasn't answering. I left a message, trying to sound as calm as possible. "Asher, it's Mom. Please come to my house as soon as possible. Something terrible has happened. Fiona, she set the house on fire. She's been arrested. Please come." When I handed the phone back to the officer, he asked, "Do you have a place to stay tonight?" I wondered. My whole world was centered in this house. All my belongings, all my contacts, all my savings. I had only the clothes I jumped out of the burning house in and my wallet, which happened to be in my pocket. "I can stay at a hotel," I said. "I have the money." "Good," he nodded. "When the firemen are done and the place is safe, we can see if there's anything left for you to pick up." I nodded, even though I realized it was unlikely that anything would survive. The flames were too strong. They had consumed the house almost entirely. Sitting in the police car, I watched as the last walls burned down, as the second floor collapsed, as the firefighters worked hard to keep the fire from spreading to the neighboring houses. And all I could think about was how I would tell Abigail that the house that had been in their family for generations no longer existed. And how I would explain to Asher that his wife was an arsonist who had destroyed not only the building, but her own life and possibly their marriage. The feeling of unreality of what was happening never left me. It felt like I was watching a movie about someone else's life rather than experiencing my own tragedy. Maybe it was a defensive reaction of the psyche, not allowing me to realize the full scale of the loss at once. I sat still, staring at the fire, and thought about how my whole life had been contained within these walls. And now that they were gone, I would have to start over. At the age of 73. Suddenly, my cell phone vibrated in my pocket. I flinched and pulled it out. By some miracle, it had survived all this. Abigail's name popped up on the screen. "Hello?" My voice sounded alien, clipped. "Aunt Moira? What's wrong? I got a call from the Peoria police saying that our house—" I took a deep breath to gather my strength. "Abigail, honey, something terrible has happened. Fiona, Escher's wife. She burned down the house." There was a long pause, and I could almost physically feel the shock my niece was feeling. "What? But why? How did it happen?" "It's a long story," I answered tiredly. In short, she found some old letters from Tiffany and decided that the house should have belonged to me, not you. When I refused to support her in that idea, she just set it on fire. "Oh my God," Abigail whispered. "Are you okay? Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I assured her. "But the house, I'm afraid there's nothing left of it." "I don't care about the house," she exclaimed. "The important thing is that you're alive. I'm leaving immediately. I'll be in Peoria in 3 hours. Tell me where you'll be and I'll come straight there." We agreed to meet at the Marriott downtown. Abigail promised to book rooms for both of us and contact the insurance company. As we finished talking, I felt a rush of tenderness for my niece. Despite the horrible situation, she had my welfare in mind first and foremost, not my lost and found. Unlike Fiona, who was willing to destroy everything for the sake of her greed. I looked at the burning ruins of the house and thought about the fact that Fiona, without realizing it, had destroyed more than just a building. She had destroyed her own life, perhaps her marriage to Asher, her reputation, her freedom, all because of material possessions that, as it turned out, could turn to ash in a matter of minutes. When the firefighters finally managed to put out the fire, the Victorian mansion that had been my home for so many years was nothing more than a charred hulk. The smell of burning was in the air, mingling with the smell of wet ash. It had started to rain, as if nature was trying to help put out the fire. The policeman offered to drive me to the hotel, and I gratefully accepted. We were silent on the way. I was too absorbed in my thoughts to keep up a conversation. When we arrived at the Marriott, Asher was standing at the entrance, pale and confused. When he saw the police car, he rushed toward it. "Mommy!" he exclaimed as he helped me out. "What happened?" Where's Fiona? Your message? I looked into his eyes, full of worry and incomprehension, and realized that now I was going to have to break his world, just as Fiona had broken mine. And that was perhaps the hardest challenge of the whole horrible day. The Marriott Hotel was warm and cozy, but I still couldn't get warm. The shivering that had started at the burning house didn't go away, as if the cold had settled somewhere deep inside me. The room was spacious and comfortable. Abigail had taken care of that, booking it before she'd arrived. But all those comforts seemed so foreign, so fake after losing my own home. Asher sat in the chair across from me, pale and devastated. It was as if he'd aged 10 years since I'd told him what had happened. His shoulders slumped, his eyes darkened. Even his voice sounded different, muffled and lifeless. I still can't believe it, he said for the umpteenth time. She couldn't. It's just crazy. I stared out the window in silence. I could see the lights of Peoria at night behind the glass, so calm and ordinary, as if nothing had happened, as if my world hadn't collapsed hours ago. The police said they've taken her into custody, Asher continued. She's being charged with arson. That's a serious charge, Mom. She could get real time. I know, I said quietly. I'm sorry, Asher. He looked up at me with a tortured look. You're sorry? She burned down your house and you're sorry? I'm sorry you got caught up in it, I explained. I'm sorry that you fell in love with someone who was capable of doing something like that. And yes, I'm sorry for Fiona, too. She made a terrible mistake, and she'll be paying for it for years to come. Asher shook his head as if he couldn't accept what I was saying. But how could she? How could she think that would solve the problem? Even if she was right about the house, and she obviously wasn't, how could arson fix anything? I sighed. It pained me to see my son suffering, but I didn't know what I could do to help him. She was obsessed, Asher. The idea that the house should belong to you consumed her completely, and when I refused to support that fantasy, she just, snapped. Asher covered his face with his hands. I should have noticed something was going on with her. For the last few weeks, all she's been talking about is the house, the letters she found, how unfair it is that you're not fighting for your rights. I thought it was just talk, but she really believed it. So much so that he didn't finish, but he didn't need to. We both knew where Fiona's obsession had led. There was a knock on the room door. Asher got up and opened it, and Abigail stood on the doorstep, road-weary but determined. She hugged me tightly, then shook Asher's hand. I brought all the papers, she said, placing a leather folder on the table. Mom's will, the title deed, all the deeds to the house. And one more thing that should clear things up. She pulled an old envelope from her bag, yellowed with age. This is a letter my mom wrote to me a month before she died. I've cherished it all these years. I took the envelope with trembling fingers and pulled out a doubled folded piece of paper. Tiffany's handwriting was so familiar that my heart snapped. My dear Abigail, by the time you read this letter, I will most likely be gone. Don't be too sad. I have lived a good life and am grateful for every day of it. I want to talk to you about our family home in Peoria. The will leaves it to you, a decision I made deliberately and thoughtfully. The house should remain in our family line from mother to daughter as it has always been. However, I also want my dear sister Moira to be able to live there for as long as she wishes. She has looked after the house all these years while I was in Chicago, and I know that for her it is not just walls and a roof, but a real home full of memories. Please let her stay there. She'll never ask for it herself. Too proud, but I know it would make her happy. Legally, the house is yours, and you're free to use it as you see fit. But I hope you will heed my plea and allow Moira to spend her final years within familiar and beloved walls. Love, your mom, Tiffany. I put the letter down, feeling tears come to my eyes. Tiffany knew me so well, understood my feelings even without words. See? Abigail said quietly. A mom always wanted the house to pass to me, but so you could live in it. Just the way things were before, until yesterday. Asher took the letter from my hands and read it to himself. His face changed as he read, from tension to understanding, then to bitterness. All these letters that Fiona found, he began. I don't know exactly what she found, I interrupted him gently, but she obviously misinterpreted them. Perhaps Tiffany wrote to your father about her wish that I could live in the house, and Fiona took that as her intention to sign the house over to me. But that was never Tiffany's plan. Escher sank into his chair as if his legs were no longer holding him up. So Fiona burned down a house that could never even theoretically belong to us? Exactly, Abigail nodded. And now she'd be legally responsible. I've already contacted the insurance company and my lawyer. In addition to the criminal case, she's facing a serious civil suit. The next morning, I woke up to the phone ringing. It was Detective Morgan, who was in charge of the arson case. Mrs. Prescott, we found something interesting. Your sister-in-law kept a diary detailing her plans for the house. It appears that she had been preparing for this, incident. It took my breath away. What exactly did it say? Lots of notes about how she tried to find legal loopholes to contest the will, how she planned to get you to sign some documents. And, most disturbing of all, several options if that didn't work out. Arson was among those options. I closed my eyes, trying to comprehend what I was hearing. So this wasn't a spontaneous outburst of emotion, but a cold-blooded crime. Will these tapes be presented in court? Absolutely, replied the detective. They prove premeditation. When I told Asher about the call, he seemed to break down completely. I lived with this person, he mumbled, sleeping next to her, sharing my thoughts. And all the while she was planning a crime against my own mother. How could I have been so blind? It wasn't your fault. I put my arm around his shoulders. She played her part very well. At noon, we were called to the police station for further statements. Fiona was just being led out of the interrogation room when we arrived. Our gazes met in the hallway, and I saw something new in her eyes. Not just fear or shame, but realization. It was the first time she seemed to truly realize what she'd done. Moira, she said hoarsely. The officer accompanying her made a sign to be silent, but she continued. I didn't know. I really thought the house was supposed to be yours. Those letters. I misunderstood them. I just wanted justice for Asher. I'm so sorry. Quiet, Mrs. Prescott, the officer said sternly, drawing her away. Escher stood stiffly, staring after her. I didn't know what to say. No words could undo what had happened. In the detective's office, we were shown pages from Fiona's diary. It was painful to read, so much venom, so much hatred for an Abigail she didn't even know, and so many plans to get the house she was convinced should have been hers and Asher's. I have never seen this diary, Asher said, flipping through the pages. She always carried it with her. Now I can see why. After the police station, we met with Abigail's lawyer to discuss the civil suit. The sums involved were astronomical: the value of the house, the lost property, the moral damages. I could see Asher pale, realizing that he would have to pay for his wife's actions for the rest of his life. Don't think about it now, I told him later when we were alone. We have to wait for the court's decision first. He nodded but looked completely crushed. That evening, Abigail knocked on my room. She was holding a thick folder of documents. I found all the original letters Fiona was talking about, she said, spreading them out on the table. I can see why she was so confused. I looked through the letters. They were correspondence between Tiffany and Humphrey, my late husband, dated the year before my sister's death. Dear Humphrey, I want Moira to be able to live in the house as long as she wants after I die. It should remain in her hands as long as she lives. Taken out of context, this phrase could indeed have been misinterpreted. But in the next paragraph, Tiffany clearly wrote, of course, legally, the house will pass to Abigail, as I had always planned. But I know she will let Moira stay. They've always been close. Fiona only saw what she wanted to see, Abigail sighed. Took a phrase out of context that fit what she wanted and built a whole fantasy around it. And ruined our family, I added bitterly. The next day was Fiona's arraignment. She fully pleaded guilty and agreed to cooperate with the investigation in exchange for the possibility of a reduced sentence. As I left the courtroom, I felt strangely empty. The home in which I had lived most of my life was irrevocably lost. My son's future hung in the balance, all because one woman had let her greed and ambition cloud her judgment and conscience. Abigail took my hand. Let's go home, Aunt Moira, to Minneapolis. It's time to start a new chapter. I looked back at Asher, who was standing in the distance talking to Fiona's lawyer. What about him? I can't leave him alone right now. You won't. Abigail said firmly. But you can't live in a hotel forever. Move in with me, and Asher can come visit whenever he wants. He needs time to sort out his life too. I nodded, realizing she was right. As much as I wanted to protect my son from pain, I couldn't live his life for him. When Asher came toward us, I hugged him tightly, as if trying to give him all my strength and love. It's going to be okay, I whispered. Not right away, but it will be. He smiled weakly, and in that smile I saw a glimmer of hope. Maybe not all was lost. Maybe from the ashes of our old life we could build something new. Life at the hotel was slowly turning into a new routine. Every morning I woke up in an unfamiliar bed, trying for a few seconds to figure out where I was before reality came crashing down heavily on me. My house no longer existed. All that was left of it was a charred hulk and memories that no one could take from me. Abigail turned her room into a makeshift office. She spent hours every day on the phone, talking to lawyers, insurance agents, investigators. Her determination to get justice never wavered. It's not just money, Aunt Moira, she explained to me when I gently pointed out that perhaps I shouldn't be so adamant. It's a principle. Fiona must fully realize the consequences of her actions. I couldn't argue with her. After all, this was her house, which she had inherited from Tiffany, and it was her right to seek maximum compensation for its loss. Escher came every day, usually in the afternoon. He looked increasingly haggard, his face growing paler with each visit and his eyes growing dimmer. Torn between his devotion to me and his desire to help his wife, he seemed to be slowly losing himself. "How is Fiona?" I asked him one day when we were sitting in the hotel cafe with a cup of tea. He shrugged his shoulders without raising his eyes. "Still the same. The lawyer is trying to negotiate a deal with the prosecution, but the prosecutor is being tough, especially after they found her diary." I nodded. Fiona's diary, discovered during a search of their home, was the key piece of evidence against her. Pages filled with plans and diagrams of how to get the house made it clear that the arson wasn't a spontaneous act. She'd been mulling it over for weeks, if not months. "Fiona's parents arrived yesterday," Asher continued after a pause. They're horrified by what she's done." "They didn't know about her plans?" I asked cautiously. "Of course not," Asher exclaimed. "They are normal, sensible people. Mrs. Quinlan was crying the whole time we were talking. Mr. Quinlan was so shocked he could hardly speak. They want to meet with you and Abigail to apologize in person." "There's no need for that," I said softly. "They're not to blame for their adult daughter's actions." They feel responsible," Asher objected. "They say they may have missed something in her upbringing if she could." He didn't finish the sentence, but I knew what he meant. "What do they think of the house situation?" I asked after a while. "About Abigail's demands?" "They are in complete agreement about the need for compensation," Asher replied. "They are willing to sell their house in Wisconsin to help with the payments. Mr. Quinlan said that's the minimum they can do, but they're hoping Abigail will soften her demands regarding the criminal case," Asher finished quietly. "They're afraid that Fiona won't be able to withstand a lengthy incarceration. She's already showing signs of depression." I felt a pang of compassion. Despite everything Fiona had done, I didn't want her to suffer any more than necessary to get justice. "I'll talk to Abigail," I promised. "But I can't guarantee anything. She's very determined." Asher nodded gratefully, but I saw little hope in his eyes. That evening, Abigail knocked on my door. She looked tired, but pleased. "Good news, Aunt Moira," she said, settling into a chair. "The insurance company has agreed to pay the full value of the house and property. It's more than we expected." "That's wonderful," I smiled. "It means you can build a new house." "Or you can buy one," she nodded. "But it won't be the same house, with all its history and memories." There was a note of bitterness in her voice, and I realized that despite her practicality, Abigail was also deeply affected by the loss of a family heirloom. "You know," I said thoughtfully, "I've been thinking a lot lately about material things and their value. The house was important, sure. But what really matters are the people we love and the memories we hold in our hearts." Abigail looked at me carefully. "You talk so calmly about losing your home. I thought you'd be more upset." "Oh, I was upset," I admitted. and there are still times when I wake up and forget for a moment what happened. But then I think about what I still have you, Asher, the memories of Tiffany and our parents. And I realize that the most important things have been preserved. Abigail smiled and took my hand. You're an amazing woman, Aunt Moira. After everything that has happened, you retain such presence of mind. Years have taught me that panic and despair rarely help, I said with a slight smile. By the way, I wanted to talk to you about Fiona. Abigail's face changed instantly, becoming serious. About what, exactly? Her parents came to see Asher yesterday. They are desperate about their daughter's behavior and are willing to do anything to help with compensation. But they're also hoping you can show leniency in the matter of criminal punishment. Leniency? Abigail raised an eyebrow. After she cold-bloodedly planned and executed an arson attack on a house where you could have died? I understand your feelings, I said softly. And I'm not asking you to drop the charges, just maybe not push for the maximum sentence? Abigail was silent for a long moment, pondering my words. I'm not doing this out of vengeance, Aunt Moira, she said finally. It's just that such actions must have consequences. Otherwise, what kind of example are we setting? I agree, I nodded. But there's a difference between just consequences and wanting to destroy a person completely. She almost destroyed you, Abigail reminded me quietly. But she didn't, I countered. And I don't want this story to ruin any more lives than it already has. Think of Asher, of Fiona's parents. They're suffering too, and it's not their fault. Abigail sighed. All right, I'll think about it. I'll talk to a lawyer, see what options are available. But I can't promise anything. That's all I'm asking, I smiled, squeezing her hand. Thank you. The next day, we got some unexpected visitors. An elderly man and woman were waiting for me in the hotel lobby, looking around anxiously. I knew immediately who they were, even without an introduction. Fiona had inherited her mother's red hair and face shape. Mrs. Prescott? Mr. Quinlan asked uncertainly, stepping up to meet me. I'm Harold Quinlan, and this is my wife, Dorothy. We're Fiona's parents. I extended my hand. Nice to meet you, albeit under such sad circumstances. Mrs. Quinlan burst into tears. I'm sorry, she sobbed. We feel so awful about what Fiona did. It's unforgivable. We never imagined. Please don't blame yourself, I said, feeling uncomfortable with her emotional outburst. Fiona is an adult, and it's up to her to take responsibility for her actions. We just wanted to apologize in person, Mr. Quinlan said, supporting his wife by the shoulders. And to assure you that we will do everything we can to make amends. We've already put our house on the market. That's very generous of you, I replied. But you don't have to sacrifice your home. It's not your fault. We feel we have to, Mr. Quinlan said firmly. Perhaps if we had been more attentive parents, if we had noticed the signs. Don't torture yourself with such thoughts, I interrupted him. Sometimes people do terrible things, and no one can foresee it. They looked at me with bewilderment and gratitude at the same time, clearly not expecting such a calm reception. Escher said you were an amazing woman, said Mrs. Quinlan, wiping away her tears. I see now that he was not exaggerating. We'd also like to meet Miss Bridges, added Mr. Quinlan. To apologize to her, too. I'll tell her your request, I promised, though I doubted Abigail would want to meet Fiona's parents. She was much more uncompromising than I was. I spent the rest of the day thinking. Meeting the Quinlans had stirred up mixed feelings in me. On the one hand, I sympathized with their pain. They were obviously genuinely remorseful for their daughter's actions and would do anything to make things right. On the other hand, no amount of apologies and compensation could bring me back a house full of memories of Tiffany and our childhood. In the evening, Asher came over to see me. He looked a little better than the previous days, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. I met with the prosecutor today, he said, settling into a chair, along with Fiona's lawyer. How'd it go? I asked, trying not to show too much interest. Better than we expected. The prosecutor has agreed to consider a plea bargain. If Fiona fully admits guilt, expresses remorse, and agrees to all the terms of compensation, they can recommend a minimum sentence of 4 years instead of 15, with the possibility of parole in 2. I nodded. Sure, 4 years in prison was a lot, especially for someone who'd never been in trouble with the law before. But given the severity of the crime, it was probably the best outcome Fiona could hope for. How did she feel about it? I asked. Escher sighed. She's willing to do anything. She's completely broken, Mom. Especially after her parents' visit. They weren't yelling, not accusing, just looking at her with a frustration that was worse than any reproach. They came to see me today, I said, apologizing, talking about selling the house to compensate. Yes, they did, Asher nodded. They're grateful for your understanding. Not everyone in your position would be so generous. I'm not sure it's generosity, I said thoughtfully. It's more like fatigue from negative emotions. Anger and resentment are such destructive feelings. They hurt the one who feels them in the first place. Asher looked at me fondly. You've always been so wise, Mom. Even as a child, I remember how you could find something good in every situation. I smiled, touched by his words. I don't know about wisdom, but life has taught me that there's no point in wasting energy on hatred and resentment. They don't change anything for the better. We sat in silence for a while, each absorbed in his own thoughts. Then Asher said quietly, without looking at me, I filed for divorce. I wasn't surprised. After everything that had happened, it was hard to see how their marriage could last. Was it a difficult decision? I asked. Yes and no, he answered, looking down at his hands. On the one hand, I'd made a promise, for better or for worse. On the other, I don't know who she is anymore, Mom. A woman who could plan such a thing, keep it a secret, and then carry it out in cold blood. That's not the person I married. Or maybe I never really knew her. I'm sorry, Asher, I said sincerely. No one should have to go through something like this. You know what the weirdest thing is? He continued with a bitter chuckle. Part of me still loves her, or at least the Fiona I thought I knew. It's like I lost her twice. First when she did what she did, and then when I saw her true self. I walked over and hugged him, feeling his shoulders shake with held-back sobs. My heart was breaking with pain for my son. At 38, he should have been enjoying a happy family life, maybe raising children. Instead, he was facing an agonizing divorce trial and years of recovery from the trauma he had suffered. The next morning, I was awakened by Abigail's phone call. She sounded excited. Aunt Moira, get ready! I'm coming to pick you up in 20 minutes. What's wrong? I asked sleepily. I found a house in Minneapolis, she explained. Not far from Robert and me. It's small, but it's very cozy. I think you'll like it. You want me to move to Minneapolis? I clarified, finally waking up. Of course I do. We talked about this. You need a place to live, and I can't imagine you staying in Peoria after everything that's happened. I thought about it. We had discussed the possibility of my moving in with Abigail, but it had seemed far away, not an immediate decision. What about Asher? I asked. I couldn't leave him alone right now. Asher is 38 now, Aunt Moira, Abigail reminded me gently. He's a grown man who can handle his own problems. Besides, Minneapolis isn't on the other side of the world. He can come visit whenever he wants. Let me think about it, I asked. This is a big decision, and I don't want to rush it. Okay, Abigail agreed. But let's go see the house anyway. You're not risking anything, just keeping me company. An hour later, we were driving through the streets of Peoria toward the highway. Abigail was unusually animated as she talked about the house she had found, how close it was to her family, the beautiful parks and museums nearby. You'll be close to your grandnephews, she said. They'll be so excited. Especially Lizzie, she's always asking about you. I smiled as I listened to her. Abigail was always energetic and determined, just like Tiffany when she was young, and it made me feel good to see how much she cared for me, eager to make me comfortable after everything I'd been through. As we drove out of town, I felt strangely relieved. It was as if the weight of the last few weeks had begun to fall from my shoulders, to be left behind, along with Peoria and all the sad memories of her now. You know, I said, looking out the window, I think moving might be a good idea. A fresh start in a new place, without the constant reminders of loss. Abigail nodded approvingly. That's exactly right. A new chapter of life, Aunt Moira, and I'll be there to help you with that transition. At that moment, I felt deeply grateful to fate that I had such a wonderful niece. Despite all the loss and tragedy, I was not alone. I had a family, people who loved and cared for me. And perhaps that was more important than any house or possessions. My thoughts returned to Asher. How would he react to the news of my moving? Would he feel like I was abandoning him in his time of need? But on the other hand, maybe it would be good for him, too, to have a fresh start, without the constant reminder of tragedy in the form of me. "What are you thinking?" Abigail asked, noticing my thoughtfulness. "About Asher," I answered honestly. "About how he'd feel about me moving in." "I'm sure he'll understand," she said with conviction. "After all, he wants what's best for you, and living in a hotel all the time isn't an option." I nodded, though I had my doubts. It was too complicated, too confusing. But maybe sometimes the only way to untangle a tangle is to cut it with one decisive move. By the time we reached Minneapolis, it was late evening. We stopped at Abigail's house where Robert and the kids met us. Seeing their joyful faces, hearing the enthusiastic cries of "Aunt Moira is here," was a balm to my wounded soul. That night, lying in the guest bedroom, I reflected on the strange twists and turns of fate. Who would have thought just a month ago that I would be considering a move from the city where I'd lived all my life? That I would lose a house full of memories of my sister and parents? That my son would be going through a divorce under such dire circumstances? But life rarely asks us if we are ready for its trials. She simply sends them, and we have to find the strength to cope. And maybe that's what wisdom is all about. Not avoiding difficulties, but being able to adapt and move on, no matter what. The day of the trial was surprisingly sunny and warm. I stood on the steps of the Peoria County Courthouse, squinting against the bright light. Next to me, Asher looked like he hadn't slept in days, dark circles under his eyes. Abigail, on the other hand, was poised and elegant in an austere suit. Inside, the lawyers were waiting for us, a stern, dark-haired woman representing Abigail, and an older man with a tired face defending Fiona. "The prosecutor has agreed to a plea bargain," Fiona's lawyer reported. "Given the full plea of guilty, cooperation with the investigation, and restitution, he's recommending probation." "Probation?" Abigail asked sharply. "After premeditated arson?" "With 5 years probation and full restitution, but the judge still has to approve the agreement." A few minutes later, Fiona was brought in. She had lost weight, her skin had taken on an unhealthy grayish tint. She cast a quick glance in our direction, but immediately lowered her eyes. The judge scrutinized the case file. The procedure was short. The prosecutor outlined the charges and the terms of the deal. The defense attorney presented mitigating circumstances. The defendant, "Do you realize that by pleading guilty, you are giving up your right to a full trial?" asked the judge. "Yes, Your Honor," Fiona answered quietly. "And you admit that you intentionally set fire to a house belonging to Abigail Bridges?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Before I pass sentence, is there anything you'd like to say?" Fiona stood up, her hands trembling. "I fully realize the gravity of my actions, and I am deeply remorseful. I allowed greed and false beliefs to cloud my judgment. I hurt the people I was supposed to love. I destroyed not just a building, but a house full of memories. I robbed Mrs. Prescott of the roof over her head and everything she held dear." She paused, gathering her strength. "I am willing to be held responsible for my actions and agree to any compensation. I will work for the rest of my life to make amends. I do not ask for forgiveness because I know some things cannot be forgiven. I only ask for an opportunity to redeem myself." The judge then turned to Abigail, who emphasized the value of the lost home and agreed to the terms of the deal, but asked for maximum probation. When it was Asher's turn, he looked like every movement was hurting him. "I'm caught between two fires, my mother and my wife. I can't defend what Fiona did, but I also can't demand the maximum punishment. I've filed for divorce. Our marriage cannot continue after what happened." After a recess, the judge handed down the sentence: probation for 5 years with a probationary period, $1,200,000 in restitution, psychological rehabilitation, and community service. As we left the courtroom, we felt a strange numbness. The world continued to exist as if nothing had changed, but everything had changed for us. "What about compensation?" Escher asked. $1,200,000 is a huge sum." "We'll work out a payment schedule," Abigail replied. She can pay in installments, but every cent must be repaid. I'll help in any way I can, Asher said. She was my wife. I brought her into the family. Part of the responsibility lies with me, too. On the way to the hotel, Abigail talked about the house in Minneapolis she'd seen for me. Would you be willing to move? You realize you can't live in a hotel forever. What about Escher? I can't just abandon him at a time like this. You're not leaving him. Minneapolis isn't that far away. He can come visit. Plus, he probably needs his own space to recover. Okay, I'll move in with you, at least for a while. Asher came to see me this evening. Abigail said you agreed to move in. Is that true? Yeah, I think it's the best thing for me. There's nothing left for me in Peoria. No home. All my memories destroyed in the fire. Starting over in a new place, maybe that's exactly what I need. I'm gonna miss you, Mom. After everything that's happened, the thought of not having you around. I'm not gone forever, I smiled. We can always call each other, and Minneapolis isn't that far away for visits. It just seems so final. Like Fiona ruined not only the house, but our whole lives. Don't let her ruin more than she's already ruined, I said firmly. You're still young. You have your whole life ahead of you. You can start over. And you? You're 73, starting over at that age. It's never too late for new beginnings. And there's something liberating about losing all material attachments. Now I can focus on what really matters, the people I love. A week later, Abigail and I were on our way to Minneapolis. All my belongings fit into one bag. Escher saw us off, standing by the car with a strained smile. Call me when you get there. I will, and you get here as soon as you can. He nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. Things between us were still strained, despite our mutual love. Too much had happened, too much pain had been inflicted. But I believed that time could heal even deep wounds. Unlike my relationship with Fiona, which was ruined forever, with Asher we had a chance to rebuild. As we drove away, I watched my son in the rearview mirror. He stood with his hand raised in a gesture of farewell, a small figure against the backdrop of the city I was leaving. My heart ached at the thought of leaving him alone, but I knew he had to make his healing journey on his own. It's going to be okay, Abigail said. Asher's strong, he'll be fine, and you deserve a fresh start after everything that's happened. I nodded, turning toward the road that would lead us to a new life. Behind us were the ashes of home, broken relationships, pain, and loss. Ahead was the unknown, but also hope, a chance to start over without the weight of the past.